No matter what method you use for real estate photography, leveraging natural light is crucial. Whether you're using HDR, flambient, single exposure, or some other method, natural light not only looks good, psychologically it also makes us feel good. And that's one of the topics I'm going to be discussing and showing in this episode, along with methods and techniques you can apply to then leverage the best natural light in various situations and also to varying degrees to make your real estate photos stand out. As humans, psychologically, we're drawn to a certain amount of natural light. It's something known as biophilia. And that's where we seek connections with nature naturally. Things like sunlight, plants, views of the outdoors, all of which reduce stress. So that's why our mind is immediately drawn to that, because it gives us a feeling of comfort, but only to a certain degree. Conversely, we're also less attracted to dark environments because instinctively it tells us that danger may lie ahead. Something could be lurking in the dark forest. So naturally our minds are wired to protect us from darkness. So we don't want to see things that are too dark or too bright. In other words, we equate darkness to danger. So there has to be a balance between how much natural light and the shadows that it provides compared to that natural feeling that gives us a sense of biophilia and then comfort. At the same time, our brains are wired for contrast. And that's where we have just enough shadows to where our minds are wired to see things like depth perception, also spatial awareness. A lack of contrast, on the other hand, makes something look unnatural, so our eyes aren't drawn to it. And that's where if you have flat images that really lack any type of oomph, any type of natural light that might highlight something, then it's just not appealing to look at. Our minds just kind of tune that out. So that's the balance that we're really after when we start going through these different methods, is that we want to have something that does accentuate natural light. We don't want it too dark. We don't want to have a lack of contrast. We want to have just enough contrast. When we take a look at real estate photography, we have to make decisions on the degree of natural light, what natural light sources to emphasize, for instance, whether it's sun, windows, interior lights, and in some cases we also have to imitate natural light. With all of this depending on the various property and also the customer and the type of photos that we're trying to produce. Now that we know how the human mind is going to be looking for a certain amount of natural light in our photos, let's take real-world examples and go through this, and using 3 of the popular methods of using either HDR, flambient, or single exposure RAWs. Using this example, we can show the 3 different methods of single exposure, HDR, or flambient. So right now you can see I've got these separated here into various groups, and I'll go through these. Let's start though with just the single exposure RAW. Now this is very typical of architectural work where you can just take a single exposure, and that's what this is here. Now this couch was removed of AI and all of those. This was for a designer. And in here then, I was able to then just using a lot of adjustments in Camera Raw filter to get a pretty good looking image. The actual raw file looked like this if we turn this off. You can see it's definitely on the warm side. There's a lot of color cast, but I'm able to really correct quite a bit of that when I just go and apply these various settings in Camera Raw filter or done in Lightroom Classic. But there's other adjustments that I'd have to make here for a lot of other color corrections, and that's what all of this is here, until I get something then that is impactful enough, and that's okay. So that's the single exposure view of it. But if we take a look at the HDR example that is here, so this might be adjusted a little bit differently depending on how you blend it, but overall it's very difficult to get a lot of good contrast with HDR because HDR wants to kind of flatten things out. So compared to a single exposure, which is here with just some color corrections and a few tweaks in some of the tonal range, then we've got something that's just a little bit more washed out. You'd have to add a lot more contrast back into it. The natural light is being leveraged, but it is a lot more difficult. But when we go to then flambient, we can see that we've got a much more impactful image. And here's the thing. Flambient gives you full control of contrast and also to what degree. If we take a look down here at these layers, now there was still some corrections that went on, but all I had to do in here was just shoot one flash shot. That was it. And then I take an ambient shot. And this is in the right blending mode here so that I can adjust the amount of luminance and wear. And then I can add darken mode window pulls as I want, like I've shown in other videos in the course, and just a variety of things to when I finally have something finished, then I've got something very impactful. Overall, this is a much more impactful image than if we tried to use just a single exposure RAW or HDR. But once again, it's that degree of natural light that we have control of if we used Flambient. Let's take a look at this next example to see what I mean. So in this example here, this is nothing but a Flambient and also some darken mode window pulls and a few adjustments that I'll go through. But if we take a look at just the ambient shot alone, we can see that there's a variety of issues. There's a variety of different color cast issues. There's a variety of light disparity where this far room is far brighter than what we have out here, and a lot of other stuff going on here that's just too bright. And using HDR would make this very difficult to really get this even and tone it down, and single exposure would just about be out of the question. But instead, by using Flambient, then I've got full control to do this. And here's why. When I start down at the bottom here, you can see I've got a couple flash shots. Now there's different lighting set up here like I show in the Pro Interiors course. Here's me, for instance, editing myself out over this two-sided composite. But more importantly, I can then add ambient. That's what this is here, but I'm only adding its luminance. I'm not adding the color. You can see here that I cut out the far room. I'm not adding any luminance there. I can add more luminance in other areas that I want with other layers, and then eventually just do the darken mode window pulls and then the final adjustments. Now you'll see there's a lot of moire over here, and that's what this adjustment was here. And I cover that, by the way, in my course on expert editing. But with this though, the key here is that I can control the level of ambient light. If we go back down here to just the flash shots in this amount of ambient light, I'm only at 50% opacity. If I change that opacity to 90%, I've got a lot more ambient light, a lot more natural light that is coming in. If I take that down to just 10%, there's not much, 20, 30, 40, 50% of the amount of natural light coming in is what I liked for this particular photo when it was all said and done. And very importantly here is that I didn't have to worry about color. So using just ambient light alone, I've got an issue here because ambient light is just casting colors all over the place, and there's different light sources as well. But all that goes away when I apply the Flambient technique because I'm in control of the amount of light and of course then its color throughout the space. There's also the case when we take a look at something like this. Now, this is a Flambient shot for a designer, and you'll notice here that we wanted to see the adjoining kitchen here. But if we take a look at just the ambient only shot, we can see that the kitchen is very dark. Now you'll see this type of a shot in a lot of editorial shots, a lot of editorial style for Architectural Digest. And they're not really too worried about that. They're really not trying to sell the idea on a remodeled kitchen there. They love the architectural feature of the arch. And really what they would do here is mostly just some color corrections, and that would be it. But when you're talking about the majority of styles, which is something we're going to get to here in just a little bit in this video, this gives us the control. And what we were able to do on this, you can see, is that all I did was take a flash shot. There's a flash that's in the kitchen, there's a flash by the camera, and that's all it is. Then I add my ambient luminance into it where I'd like, and then just do my final corrections on it. Then I've got this photo instead of trying to work with this. So if you wanted to really leverage all natural light, then you're not going to have something that necessarily works in your favor. But if you can control the amount of ambient light, then you have this, which still has the effect of natural light guiding us through here, but here it's not as important to have pure natural light because that just necessarily wouldn't be as flattering. But this is an exception. You don't always want to brighten the adjoining rooms. It depends on what you're really trying to reveal. And in this case, I'm leveraging the natural light coming in through the windows with a lot of luminance that's above here to make it look natural, also beaming in here, leaving this on the floor. That is totally fine. What I'm not doing though is I'm not really lighting this up here. I'm leaving my flash much weaker over in this room and not adding really much natural light. That way it doesn't distract from this image. This is leveraging natural light and not making it look then so unnatural. If it did, then if this was very bright over on this side, your eye would be drawn to it, and it's really out of frame compared to here where we actually want to guide the user through the frame. We can guide the user, the viewer, all the way across this countertop toward the natural light, and also having this bright in here also guides the eye toward that as well, which is a major feature that accompanied then this archway. As we saw in those examples, a good composition for accentuating natural light is when we can shoot toward windows. This almost always provides the best composition to accentuate natural light since you're being drawn into the light because it's at a far end, kind of like a leading line leading you through the photo. But that's not always possible. So there are times when the distance could be darker, but you still need to be able to shoot a space. It's in those cases where you have to then imitate some other type of natural light, making sure that it doesn't look artificial. And we're going to dive into some examples that show that and how you can accentuate that in these difficult cases. But before getting to that, I did want to mention that if you want to learn more about learning real estate photography, then I'd invite you to take a look at my online courses. I have courses that cover professional interior photography, expert editing, exterior photography, videography for real estate, business and marketing for real estate, and I've also written best-selling books on real estate photography as well, and I have links to all of that down in the description of this video. Here's a case when natural light does you no favors and actually works against you. In fact, this is almost all flash. If we take a look at the ambient shot, we can see that this just isn't very appealing at all. And this was for another designer, and it's a really nice kitchen, and to the naked eye it would look good, but the camera is not going to look very good. And the reason being is you can already tell there's a lot of light over here. If we take a look at another angle, we can see why. And that's because this over here, it overlooked the ocean, and we've got not just this window here, but off frame here was an entire wall of windows. So looking at the ambient shot in this case, you can see just how much light disparity there is. There must be at least 5 stops of difference between this aisle in the kitchen compared to out here. I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually 6 or 7 stops. And you can think to yourself, well, I could do a bracket of that much between my HDR photos, but the problem is it's going to try to even out the entire dynamic range, and it's going to lose contrast. So in a case like this, using almost all flash, I did have to lose some contrast on here. I can bring it out in others. But going back here to this other shot, we can see this is then where when I did my shots here, I was able to bring in a better looking, more contrasted photo. And let me show you how that was done too, just if you're curious. So here was one flash shot, and what I've got is a shoot through umbrella over here that's near the camera because we can't bounce off these ceilings. And there's a shoot through umbrella over here, and you can see the shoot through umbrella in a second flash shot here. There's right over there, the shoot through umbrella with an 8200 in it. And it's not trying to light up this area, it's really just giving me light so that I can tone down this area here, which then I did by masking in just portions of this. And it just happened to work where I was able to darken the refrigerator as well and didn't have to take another shot. Then selectively, I added some natural light, some ambient light. So this is then where the natural light came in, but this is where I'm imitating then natural light where I would think it should be. So when this was all done, then we've got something that looks pretty good, but you'll notice here I added a little oomph over on the end with a brightness and contrast layer just to try to give even a little bit more natural light from what would normally be coming in through windows here. If you were buying this house, yes, you might argue the point that these windows and over here need to be able to show the amount of light. I disagree with that. But more so, this is for a designer and they don't care about that. They're trying to show the kitchen, not the entire house. And so here I'm trying to then imitate what natural light would look better than this, which is the true natural light. So sometimes you are the one that needs to bring the light. Another aspect of leveraging natural light is what to do about interior lighting. So besides the sun and natural lighting coming in from the outside, there are different things we have to consider based on the technique that we're going to be applying on what to do with those interior lights. Now, there are some lights that just need to be turned off no matter what. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But before I do, I want to show and talk about the three different methods real quick. If we're talking about flambient, then there's really nothing to worry about because you can, during that process, be able to eliminate all of the natural light or nearly all of it, and that then gets rid of all the color and the problems that come along with that. If you're using single exposure, that is the other side of the spectrum where it's very difficult because you really don't have control over much dynamic range, and there's a lot of color correction that goes into it. But when we're talking about HDR, there's a middle ground on this. And it's not just a matter of bracketing shots and putting those all together. There's also a matter in techniques that you can use to leverage natural light, but only its luminance and only to certain degrees. Let me show you what I mean. Here we have a high-end HDR. It uses some of the techniques that I talk about and I show in my expert editing course, so you can get a good HDR photo from what normally would be just this ambient shot here. So by using this technique, we can control the amount of ambient color and ambient light because we're doing a variety of different things. If we take a look at just the basic HDR blending here, we can see that in our HDR blending, the lights were off. We were able to do that because we were able to take another shot and to a varying degree, bring back some of the luminance of the lights to where we felt that would be good. In this case, it was at 70%. We can change that. For instance, I could say I only wanted it 50% or I wanted it 90%. Whatever level I feel comfortable with, I can control that. I can put a mask on it. I can delete things where I need to, but I'm not then being affected by the various colors that I would normally have here out of this ambient light in this ambient shot that was in normal mode. Then I can go on though, and this is typical of HDR where I've got to do a lot of color corrections to be able to get this looking good because I still have some ambient light that I'm dealing with. So that ambient light will have ambient color. Then I can do a darken mode window pull. I don't have to cut that in. That's another one of the techniques I show in the expert editing course. And then my final image with a few bumps then looks like this. The key here though is that by manipulating lights off and on for various layers, you can control color and brightness of interior lighting and to the degree that you desire, but this is more complicated and time-consuming than just doing a simple flambient, but it's definitely an option, so it's included then in the expert editing course. But the other issue with interior lights is that in some cases, some lighting should just be completely turned off. The basic rule is if it's not part of the house, then you might want to turn those lights off. Lamps, especially near a window, like in this example, should be turned off if they are distracting and it's shedding too much light. You already have light coming in from the window. You don't need to have something by a window. Now this flambient shot of the exact same room takes care of controlling that light, but the light doesn't need to be turned on itself unless you want some degree of luminance like I did in this photo. On the other hand, high-end lighting and ceiling lights should be on, like in this bathroom that has what the designer called Zelda lights. They kind of do look like it. They would be from Zelda. But using flambient, you never have to worry about light, color, or the power. You are in control because you are eliminating, once again, most of all of that from the ambient, color, and power. By using flash and then bringing back luminance, you can control to what extent you want that power, and the color is automatically taken care of. Using the HDR techniques, you can control it to some degree, but with single exposure, this becomes very difficult. Now, some architectural and design clients will be okay with that if you had to turn all the lights off, but that's only in particular cases, and it falls under something we have to consider. It's the next topic of this video, and that is styles. There are 3 different real estate photography styles that we do need to consider, and this will determine also how much natural light we want to leverage. Now, the one that is most confusing out there that a lot of people equate to real estate and high-end architecture is what you see out of Architectural Digest. It's a style known as the editorial style. You'll see this a lot in Architectural Digest where things are very dark, they're very shadowy, lights are almost always turned off. But Architectural Digest is not a magazine that was written for the general public to be able to sell things like kitchen remodeling or, for instance, a house. So in this case, that type of style, the editorial style, is really meant for artists pleasing artists. In other words, designers doing something for other designers. It's not meant from designers to consumer. To see an example of this, this particular dining room was shot for a designer client of mine, but it didn't go really heavy on the editorial style. If I did go heavy, it would look more like this AI simulation where features have extremely high contrast. But this style isn't favored by most markets for real estate photography. In fact, when it comes to residential photography, people think of the other side of the spectrum, that it's going to be washed out HDR and lose contrast, but that's not the case. Yes, we do want brighter photos in residential listings when we're shooting those types of photos, but we also want to have natural light, because natural light does accentuate a living space to be able to show that look how much natural light can come into a space. It doesn't mean that we want to have a lot of dark areas. Remember, one of the psychological factors is things that are dark are equated with danger. So we want to be able to have enough lifting of the shadows where we can see the items, not to where things go almost completely dark, and overall the image should be light and bright, but not overexposed, not high key at all. That then classifies residential as kind of a medium contrast when we're talking about leveraging natural light. It's going to be more important to be able to show the space in its best light. That doesn't always mean that it's going to be all natural light. Now, when we talk about then luxury or standard architectural and design work for remodel companies and designers who are getting promotional material that they're going to then put out to market their services to a consumer base, that's when we may get a little higher in contrast, and typically they're not as bright either. They just don't turn out very well in print material that way, and they're really there to showcase the details of their countertops, their cabinets, things of that nature. Now, some photographers, it's become too common to be able to just automatically shoot some bracket very quickly of photos in HDR, send that off to some editor, but you're just going to have just run-of-the-mill photos. Sure, they'll work, people will pay for them, but they won't stand out. They won't be any different from the competition. But by mastering natural light, that gives you the edge, and when you're doing your own editing especially, or you can coach your editor on how that you want your style to look, that's when you can start bringing your photos up to a higher appeal. So remember though, no matter what method you're going to use, whether it's HDR, flambient, single exposure, or something else, remember that when you control the light, then you control the image.